Hi.
How are you?
Oh, I'm good, but I sure wish we were in person. I could hug your neck.
I know. I saw your name on the email. I was like, Meredith, yay! I was so happy to see
I'm
it.
so happy to see you. Yeah, I got switched over to this panel recently because I'm on a Mac and something, but I'm really excited to be on this panel. But I have a question. Are you sharing any slides or anything? You're just talking. That's what I figured. Okay.
Yep, all the words, none of the pictures.
Good. Okay, I'm looking to see how I make you a host. This is my first time doing this, but Mary gave us all kinds of good guidance. I just have to do something official here. All right.
Oh, Ronnie just sent me a text. It's making her re-download the app. As soon as it does, it says she has 5 minutes left.
Well, that's okay. She'll get here when she can. And I see you there. Can you hear me? I'm just trying to remember how to make you a
presenter instead of an
attendee. Yeah, I'll get there. I'll figure it out at some point. Oh, you're already a presenter. No.
Meredith, you doing okay?
I am, but I cannot figure out how to make her a presenter. When I click on the ellipse, it says make an attendee, and I can't tell if she already is a presenter.
If it says make an attendee, then they're set as a presenter.
Okay, and so like when Crystal joins, if it is just clicking on the ellipses, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. How are you, Anne? Are you hanging in?
I've got 5 screens going at once, so
Okay.
I'm a little...
Well, I think we're pretty straightforward here.
Okay, well, if you need anything, just holler, okay? I've got you on, but...
Okay, thanks,
all right,
Anne. Okay. So we're being recorded, Erica, but I'm still going to chat with you.
Okay, that sounds good.
Have you gone to any other panels yet?
Not yet. I had a full teaching day yesterday and exams, and advising is starting, and yeah, it's the crazy time, and I suspect you're in the same boat. We don't have a spring break.
Same. Yeah,
we've got these like singular days spaced out, and I'm just really missing that. Oh, I see Catherine Cutshaw. Hi. She's just logging in.
Hey, good morning.
I was so glad to see you. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Do you know Meredith?
I do not. Hi, Meredith.
Hi, I'm Meredith. Nice to meet you, Catherine.
Nice to meet you.
You two have a lot in common. You just don't know it because you don't know each other. So Catherine is a UNC Asheville graduate, and she's in charge of special collections at the Pack Memorial Library in Asheville. Nice. And she graduated with a history degree from UNC Asheville and is giving talks all around the area. And Meredith is from Western North Carolina and has deep roots here and is a remarkable Appalachian studies scholar. So you two would have lots to talk about.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks for the introduction.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully one day we'll be in the same room together, Catherine.
We're so close.
I know.
I hope so. I don't know. It's like with each, like opening up of things, I have all this like tension I wasn't quite expecting to feel, but it's like, are you sure it's safe? Are you sure it's okay for me to do that? Or
How are your mom and dad?
They're doing well. Thank you for asking. Yeah, they have both gotten both of their shots and are past the 2-week point, and so I just feel so much better. So much better. Every appointment they have, or grocery store trip, or what, they're very careful, but they still, have to go do things. So yeah. Hey, Ronnie.
Hi. Gosh. So I'm so sorry. I don't know what I did wrong. And can you hear me and see me?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, great. It made me re-download the app, and then it wouldn't let me on with the app. So I'm on with my browser. Anyway, hi.
I'm sorry you had to go through that. And I wanted to tell.
It's just me. I'm sure, or my connection is crazy up here in Burnsville, but I think we're all fine now. So here I am.
Good. And I know Crystal is on her way. She did let me know that she had an appointment early this morning, and she said it might be like 10:30 on the dot when she logged in. Right. So she's
well, good. I'm not even the latest person. All right, Erica, are those real books behind you, or did you rent them just to
No, they really are. This is my upstairs office space, teaching space, and I've got the cutest little desk, which is so not functional. It's like this tiny little thing that my family had refinished for me, and like I can't fit anything on it. And it was a good idea before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, I might want to upgrade.
Well, off in the distance over there, behind me looks very nice and tidy. Off in the distance over there is the round oak table that I write about as a food table. you couldn't put a biscuit on it right now. It's just like piled this tall from just with stuff, you know? And I'm the only person who lives here, so I don't know what the deal is, but that's just how it is.
That's our dining room table. And when it's time to eat, we just sort of like shove everything down to the end. Hi, Crystal.
Looks like Crystal. Is that Crystal?
Yay.
I just, oh.
So anyone who is in attendance, if your camera is on, you show up with the other presenters. So I'll ask everyone to turn their camera off, and then we'll just get to see the people talking. So I'm going to do the same thing. But Ronnie, Crystal, and Meredith, and Erica, I'm Meredith, and I'm glad to help facilitate. I will hopefully be silent and out of the way, but if you need me, just know that I'm here for anything, and I will remind you of time if we need to, but you're pros, it'll be good. You've got till 11:45.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Should we wait for 2 minutes to give people a little bit of time to get signed in if they're coming?
Sorry, let me ask one more question. Are y'all going to have time for Q&A?
We should have a few minutes at the end. I was gonna, we were joking that we could talk about these questions for hours and hours. So I thought if we're going until 11:45, then maybe we could stop the conversation between the three of us around 11:35 or a minute or two before, and have it at least a little bit of time for questions and discussion. Does that sound okay, Meredith?
Yeah, oh, it's up to y'all completely. I was just offering, I will watch the chat, and because it can be a distraction to y'all maybe if people use the chat. So I'll watch that and pipe in. If you have time for questions, I'll read some of those to you or point you to the chat.
Oh, that would be great.
Okay.
That's something that yeah, I struggle with when teaching. It's great, but it's like chat explodes and people are talking, and yeah, it's a lot to keep up with. Well, how's the weather where you both are? It's warm and sunny here.
We have rain.
Oh.
And I'm in the middle. I have clouds, but no rain.
It's supposed to get to 73 today. I mean, it's really warm. Springtime.
Yeah, it has definitely been spring here. I have daffodils up, and my poor little forsythia, I'm afraid, I have a window full of a forsythia bush, and all the buds are out. And I know this weekend we're supposed to get cold again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think down in the 30s at some points. Okay, well, it's 10:30. We should get started. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for making time on a Friday morning to attend this panel. As lots of people have been saying, I really, really wish we were in person, but I'm grateful to have this opportunity. So the title of our panel today is Gathering at the Table. Crystal Wilkinson and Ronnie Lundy discuss culinary representation, shame, and redemption. So I'll be convening the panel, and I'll start with some introductions. My name is Erica Abrams-Locklear. I'm convening today. I'm professor of English at UNC Asheville, and I'm working on finishing up a book called Appalachia on the Table, Representing Mountain Food and People. The project explores how representations of food in Appalachia have shaped national perceptions of the region and its people. One of the book's chapters focuses on food and shame. In it, I discuss Crystal's 2016 novel, The Birds of Opulence, and I'm utterly fascinated by how shame, food, land, fertility, and women's bodies intersect in the text. I can't wait for today's discussion. So next on our panel is Ronnie Lundy. Ronnie is hands down one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known, experts on Appalachian food. Her 2016 Appalachian cookbook, Vittles, won the James Beard Book of the Year Award and the award for Best in American Cooking. She is the author of a number of other cookbooks, including Shuck Beans, Stacked Cakes, and Honest Fried Chicken, Butter Beans to Blackberries, The Festive Table, In Praise of Tomatoes, Sorghum Savor, and the aforementioned Vittles. Her edited collection, Cornbread Nation 3, Foods of the Mountain South, is required reading for anyone interested in food, literature, and representation. Ronnie was a founding member of the Southern Foodways Alliance and the Appalachian Food Summit. In 2009, she received the Southern Foodways Alliance's Craig Claiborne Lifetime Achievement Award. I could go on. We are very fortunate to have her here today. So thank you, Ronnie, for talking with us.
Thank you.
And then next is Crystal Wilkinson. Crystal is an extraordinary award-winning author of both long and short fiction, as well as poetry. The impressive bio available on her webpage sums up her litany of accomplishments well. She is a USA Artist Fellow and the award-winning author of The Birds of Opulence, which won the 2016 Ernest Gaines Prize for Literary Excellence, Water Street, and Blackberries. Nominated for the John Dos Passos Award, the Orange Prize, and the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, she has received recognition from the Yaddo Foundation, Hedgebrook, the Vermont Studio Center for the Arts, the Fine Arts Works Center in Provincetown, and others. Her short stories, poems, and essays have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies, including most recently the Kenyon Review, Story, Agni Literary Journal, Emergence, Oxford American, and Southern Cultures. Her fourth book of poetry, which I'm really excited about, Perfect Black, is forthcoming from the University Press of Kentucky in August 2021, so mark your calendars. She currently teaches at the University of Kentucky, where she is Associate Professor of English in the MFA in Creative Writing program. For those interested in her depictions of food, read all of her work, and also check out her beautiful essay, Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghosts, in Emergence Literary Magazine. We are likewise very fortunate to have Crystal here with us today. Thank you, Crystal, for talking with us. So I thought I would start with just a very, very brief overview of The Birds of Opulence for anyone in the audience who has not had a chance to read that book. I would rush off and buy it and read it as soon as you can, but if you're not familiar with it, yeah, I thought a summary would be helpful. So the novel takes place in Opulence, Kentucky, and focuses primarily on 4 generations of the good women. Mama Minnie May, the oldest, her daughter, Granny Tukey, whose formal name is Nora Jean, her daughter, Lucy, and Lucy's daughter, Yolanda. Judgment functions as one of the central themes in the novel. Mothers judge daughters, neighbors judge neighbors, and gossip fuels steady debates among townswomen about who is sleeping with who fathered who, and what so-and-so's daughter or son has done. The novel presents Opulence as a firmly rooted community that provides a grounded sustenance for its characters, but that rootedness also proves suffocatingly toxic when generational shaming proves inescapable. One of the primary ways Wilkinson represents that inescapability is through food, and more specifically squash and the vines that propagate it. So I've got so many questions, and I know you've both got a lot to say in response. So we'll get started. I'll ask questions, and you two will answer. So the first question is, I'd love to hear about both of your experiences involving food and shame. What are some examples you can think of, either from your own lives or examples you've seen play out around you?
I'll go. I'll jump in. So when you ask this question, the very first thing I thought is, I'm not ashamed of any of my food. You know? A lot of my writing has focused on that. But then I remembered a very specific occurrence, which actually occurred when I was sitting in the dirt in a garden, which I think is really kind of appropriate to the birds. The story of the birds. But anyway, this was in New Mexico when I was a young hippie girl, and I was working in a garden, wasn't mine, with 2 other friends who were both California girls, post-Beach Boys, not so much surfers, but very, very, very into health and yada yada and all the appropriate hippie things. And I happened to be working over in a corner. Lettuce was coming up, and we were actually eating little asparagus spears that were delicious and little bites of lettuce and planting other things. And I heard Carla, one of the girls, say to Paula, the other one, "Oh my God, you know what they do with lettuce in the South? They pour hot bacon grease on it." And they both went, "Oh," and I went, "Oh, oh." And when I thought about this story, it occurs to me that about 2 weeks later, I packed up my bags and hitchhiked back to Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And I know that bluegrass music was a part of that. There was a festival going on, but I think that great desire to have my mother's kill lettuce was there too. If this had happened later in my life, I would have given them a real lesson. Because it occurs to me that every salad dressing you put on is just grease on lettuce. Come on, give me a break. And we were being frugal and using a product that we already had in the kitchen, didn't have to go out and buy it. But I remember feeling, I felt like I couldn't say to them, "That's good. I've eaten that. That's delicious. That's spring. That's the first taste of greens. We look forward to it." I couldn't say that in that group, in that community of people. It took a long time.
Well, when you asked this question to us before, I started laughing because I said I've almost always been fat. So food has always been, any kind of food has always been a shame. It's a shame. Look at her. What she's eating. That whole thing's a shame. But and I really couldn't think of a time for myself. But I thought about in my family how different it was than in other people's families. For example, my daughters were little skinny things genetically. And so the shaming came from my grandmother. It had more to do with my parenting, I think, because she thought they were too little. And so every time I went home, she would have mashed potatoes with swimming in butter, or she would have rice with butter and sugar in a bowl and just would follow my toddlers around with a spoon to make sure that they were well fed. Because, of course, to her, a little bit of plumpness meant that you weren't impoverished. And so she wanted to make sure that everyone was plump and well taken care of.
I was one of those toddlers that got followed around by the great aunts and my mom, and I think that's why I ended up being overweight. I'd like to blame it on them, right?
Those are great stories. Thank you. I was reminded too, Crystal, of that section in Birds of Opulence when the narrator talks about how with homecoming that members of the community who have left and then come back bring treats and snacks that they feel are superior, and they like dole them out to people who have not left opulence. And I was wondering if you could just talk about that a little bit and why Yolanda's like, but then we went and ate the candy we wanted anyway.
Right. Some of that I can sort of not, of course, that's a scene that I wrote that was made up, totally of fiction, but I can remember those occasions of people coming home that where their intentions were to move you up to the next level by bringing you something. So that's where that scene came from, of imagining all of these people coming home and trying to elevate their families by bringing in fancy things from the city that their relatives had never eaten. So that is also a form of shaming, I think. And food being associated with socioeconomics, whether you're you're poor or not. And I can remember the other way, like when I moved up here, and of course, writers are in the world of always in the world of a good cheese on a plate, and I had never eaten such a variety of cheeses outside American and cheddar before I became a writer and started moving into around in the world. And I remember one of my cousins said, you're putting fancy goat cheese in your chili. Like, it was a sort of, you've gotten above your raising kind of thing. Like, if that's what you're doing, if you're putting some kind of, to them, weird cheese in your chili, then you've went too far.
I think that's a pretty common thing for those of us who leave and, come and go back and forth, is that the community that we come from can shame us for these new things that they feel we're somehow commenting. There's a cross-shaming thing. They feel like we're maybe shaming the food they like or have eaten by bringing these new things in, and then they shame us in return for getting above our raising. I mean,
yeah,
that's literally the term everybody uses.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how that sort of works both ways, because always with an accent, if you coming into these sort of fancy places, there's always this question, like, and we always feel like I always felt like there was a judgment behind it. Like, we have some brie that, like, do you eat brie? Like, you're from the mountains. Are you gonna, do you know what this is? Are you gonna be able to, are you gonna understand what this is? And then of course it's the opposite way. When you go home, like, why are you mashing your beans? Well, this is hummus. Like, but why are you mashing the beans up? Just eat them.
Yeah.
And this is fascinating. I mean, thank you for talking about these things. The term I'm kind of obsessed with, I mean, especially in this chapter I'm trying to work on, is culinary capital. So it's kind of a riff on this idea of cultural capital, which is drawn from this theorist, Pierre Bourdieu, who talks about different kinds of capital. And, there's the capital we all understand, like the economic money capital, and then there's the cultural capital that is completely dependent on context, which is exactly what you're talking about, that foods, the social stigmas or the social cachets associated with particular foods change depending on the context in which they're consumed and the people who are around you and how they're viewing those things. And I don't know, listening to both of you talk about that just made me think a lot about discourse communities and about identity conflicts, and all of that's wrapped up in food as well. And it kind of leads me to the next question. And I wondered if you could both talk a little bit more about how these paradigms seem to work, maybe specifically or don't work specifically within the Appalachian context. Do you think it functions differently in this region for different groups of people? I'm thinking specifically of different ethnic groups or racial groups, and like how all of these things are playing out when there seems to be this sort of national understanding, which is not particularly accurate, of what counts as Appalachian food. So I know that's a whole bunch of questions all wrapped into one, but I guess how does this issue of cultural capital play out in the Appalachian context, kind of specifically, do you think?
That sounds like a question for Ronnie. Ronnie's got an expert answer for that one.
Well,
I'm thinking of more stories, but maybe.
Okay, well, I will take this for the moment, but I know
But we
you're
also
going
want to hear the stories.
really good to say. I've thought about, this works. First of all, food is code among Appalachians. It is a way of signaling solidarity. Crystal mentioned going into a situation where her accent identifies her as not being in that situation. And I, for whatever reason, everyone in my family but me had the most beautiful lyrical mountain accents, and I don't have much of one. If you listen closely, you can tell. But so I found when I was writing about music with musicians, Chet Atkins, Bill Monroe particularly, that are Dwight Yoakam, that I wanted to make a connection with and say, I know where you're coming from because I'm coming from there too. That talking about food was a great way to do that. And I actually tell a story that Monroe, who was a grumpy old man, really, but although he could play gracious, but he did not particularly like to be interviewed, and he was not particularly forthcoming. And the first time that I met him, he didn't really want to talk very much. And I said, well, I'm going to see you in Louisville at this festival where we're celebrating your birthday. I'm a pretty good cook. Is there anything you'd like to have for your birthday? And he said, yes, a stack cake. So I brought him a stack cake, and he invited me to come to his farm. And at that particular time, he had never invited a reporter to his actual farm. He would meet you at a restaurant that he liked to go to. So it's literal capital in that respect. And I also found when I was interviewing people for the book, I was interviewing a lot of people from the region. And again, they were skeptical. Here's this, so much has been written that has been not indicative of who and what we are, that, being a journalist or writer doesn't necessarily give you cred. But because I knew what shuck beans, leather breeches were, I could appreciate them. I understood things that were regionally specific that allowed people to talk to me. At the same time, there are things in my book that make people swear I'm not Appalachian, because it's not specific to their understanding. There's a whole argument about whether or not chow chow is Appalachian. And I didn't even know there was an argument. I thought, well, of course it is. But there are people who, say no, and they can cite the old English, something or other, yada, yada. It's pretty fascinating. And one of the early recipes in Vittles is a banana bread that has miso paste in it, which gives it, there's a banana bread, then it's used in a banana pudding. And it gives this super sweet dessert, what I think of as mountain umami, that kind of dark, sour. It's incredible. Ian Bowden makes it. And boy, I had somebody rip me a new one on Amazon because nobody from the mountains would ever use miso. How fotchdom was that? But the fact of the matter is that the largest producer of organic miso in the world is in Rutherford, North Carolina, which is in the foothills of the Appalachians. It's a county that falls, I think, into the arc. So it goes both ways. It can be a signifier. It can be your card for entry. Or if your specific family did a certain thing, it can be it can become an issue. Cornbread has I assumed that all Southerners ate cornbread without sugar in it because, by God, you would never have put sugar in the cornbread in my family. And I knew other people who said that. And then I discovered, no, this is not true at all. There are other people who believe strongly. And there's a question about whether or not this is a racial question. Do white Southerners not use sugar and Black Southerners do use sugar? I don't have any indication that it is clearly one or the other. I think it has to do, I think it actually has to do more with region. My guess is that it has to do with the type of corn that people grew up used to eating. But these become flashpoints, I think, and it can work well or it can work badly.
Yeah, I feel the same. I'm glad you brought up the cornbread question, because every once in a while on social media, I'll either answer the question or throw it out myself. And of course, it causes this, every year when I do that, and they give you a roundup of what you did the past year, it's always the food questions that, and the most simple food question that will get the most response. And the same thing with grits. In this house, we have a grits issue with me and Ron between our grits meant to be savory or sweet, because I grew up with sweet grits. My grandparents put grits on the table almost like a cereal. We didn't do what deep Southerners do to grits. My grandmother treated it almost like cream of wheat or something. We didn't have grits on the side. But one of the things that I was thinking when you were talking about culinary capital, I don't think any other food in Appalachia has had, as you see, as much sort of culinary capital out of it as moonshine. So how can moonshine go from this thing that somebody sneaks you up a holler somewhere and who has the good moonshine, who has the bad moonshine, to where it becomes a commodity once it's put in a nice liquor store, and it becomes something that fancy people now can taste and have these moonshine tastings and not have to experience the wonder of meeting the maker or meeting the bootlegger. So I think about that a lot, and think about how food goes from a normal, regular, everyday Appalachian table to its elevation in a fancy restaurant, and eaten by people who would normally have it on their table. But it becomes sort of something exotic in the restaurant for them to try.
That is so true about moonshine, and I've seen it. I mean, I know we all have, again and again, especially on menus in Asheville, and that breweries are partnering with moonshine makers, and some just really interesting cocktail offerings that I certainly had never heard of or would have thought of. And it's not to say that I'm sure it's delicious. I'm sure it's wonderful, but it's just such a different kind of packaging, and the price tag is often pretty surprising to me as well.
Yeah. I think I had an ultimate experience yesterday in this context. I was at the Ingalls in Burnsville, North Carolina. Ingalls, for anybody who doesn't, not from around here, that's our regional big grocery. And as I was driving out of the parking lot, I love old trucks, as anyone who's ever seen the Chevy Astro will tell you. But here was this beautiful 1950s pickup truck that had just been totally cherried out. It was gorgeous, the gleaming chrome. And my memory is it was a beautiful yellow on the hood with red down the side. And I was just enraptured by this truck. And as I turned, I could see that it had writing on the side. And what I saw was that it is a moonshine maker. It's a distiller who makes moonshine. And I'm thinking, holy cow, we have gone from you would have had that truck, you would have beaten it up so nobody would know what you were doing. I mean, your engine should have been primo, but your truck sure looked like it couldn't even walk, right? And now it's like this upscale, beautiful. I'd have been scared to park that truck in the Ingalls lot. I did notice he was way down at the edge.
It's a little bit different than Thunder Road, huh? Okay, so we could talk about that point forever. I think there are lots of foods. I keep thinking about ramps too. I'll say this quickly, and I won't name the restaurant, but the funniest thing I've experienced in a restaurant in Asheville was this $10 ramps appetizer that was offered, and it was ramps in a bag. And I studied the menu and I thought, well, this must be some puff pastry or like, I don't know. And so I asked the server and he talked to me for at least 5 minutes about how the ramps are lightly seasoned with olive oil and sea salt and put in a paper bag in a convection oven. And then that was the appetizer, and I think it was $10. So anyway, moving on. I really want to talk about, Crystal, your fictional representations of food. I think they are so important and so fascinating. And you've got these vivid descriptions of gardens and a woman, Sandy Crawford, sitting in the garden eating tomatoes. That sounds like what Ronnie was talking about just a minute ago in Water Street. And food is the focus of that beautiful essay, Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghosts. And it seems to function as a really significant metaphor in The Birds of Opulence. And I just wondered if you would talk to us a little bit about why and how food is such an important part of your work. And I'd love to hear Ronnie's reactions too from your perspective as a food writer. I mean, how does it inform your work, Crystal, just broadly?
Well, I think that the family I create that are also based on my own communities. Many important things happen around food. Like you can't have an important event without food. That's how I grew up, and that's how the world that these characters live in operates. And so many food is, of course, something that we need, but I think that even something to drink, like I can never remember a conversation that my grandmother would have without there being something to eat or drink. Even if it was a confrontational moment, and if she was sort of into it with my auntie who lived down the street. Even when they were mad at each other, it was like, well, come in and have a cup of tea. Come in and have a cup of tea, or I made a pie. Let's sit here at the table and talk. And so part of it just comes organically, that when the characters are embarking upon something in my work, there's food automatic. And for years, people would talk about, oh, you have so much food in this book, even when Blackberries came out. And I would go, really? Where is it? And then I would look and I would go, oh, yeah, when I started seeing that that I was doing it. But I think that all of these various levels, so I try to look at these families and think about one of the things that was important to me in Birds of Opulence was to show the children even how important food was to the children. Of course, kids are always hungry, but even more than that, like when Minnie Mae has this event after Yolanda's born, and the kids in the neighborhood are there. They're curious about the baby, but they're also curious about what's in the house, how they can get to the lemonade, how they can eavesdrop a little bit and find out what's going on. And all of those things have always been important to me. Church, there's always food involved in religion. And so when I started thinking about particularly Yolanda's birth, this is a time, it's set in like the 70s, and she would have normally gone to a hospital. I wanted to put them in interaction with their original home place, and to have all those generations there at the home place. And what better place than the garden? I think or maybe in earlier scenes, I had them in the yard doing something, because one of the things that they did when they went to the home place every year was sort of sweep the backyard, the dirt around the back porch, and just sweep it or make designs in it, which I watched my grandmother do many, many, many years. But it came up on the garden, and at first it was just the garden, and then I moved the camera in my mind closer, and I said, oh yeah, this is where it happens, right here where the squash is. And that's the scene I came up on. And then of course, every time I would work my way all the way through the book, once I had made particular connections, I saw those as pulse points in the book, and I would move backwards or forwards in the book to try to put in more connections, and try to investigate what all the different facets of food meant in the context of what was happening in each scene. Does that make sense?
It does. It absolutely does. I'm processing. Marty, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, is anybody else getting some strange feedback here?
I think someone's mic is open.
Yeah, and
someone probably needs to be muted.
The name Teresa Hollingsworth has come up. So if you're Teresa Hollingsworth, turn your mic off, maybe. When I read The Bird of Opulence, and by the way, let me say two things right here. Everything Erica has said about go out and buy this book and read it now is absolutely true. The Birds of Opulence, I have given away 4 copies of it. And I don't give it away anymore because I love rereading it. It's an incredible book. Extraordinary, truly, I believe. And we could talk about that forever. And the food in the book was kind of worked in that way that we were just talking about. I felt that I belonged in this book. I was a part of it. Although it is an African American community, and that was not my upbringing or whatever, but the food, there was so much in the food that I could relate to, that I just connected to immediately. And the relationship of women to food, that and just that intense level of emotional involvement of women and children. Men relate to food too, but they are consumers, or it is performance. One of the reasons that barbecue is so central to so much of the cultural capital that gets paid for in Southern discourse is that barbecue is performative. This was just so intimate. The food was just established this immediate intimacy in that, and I a lot of books written by women. I think you had asked Erica at one point something about literature that we relate to food in, and I was writing down, The Secret Garden, when Dylan brings the roast potatoes with clotted cream, and Amy's pickled limes in Little Women. And then we could have a whole nother session talking about Wilma Dykeman's The Tall Woman and the different relationship between the woman and her husband and their cow, which simply is that he sees the cow as a signifier of his importance or significance, and she sees the cow as a partner in sustaining themselves. And that becomes becomes a commentary on the way that we, as a large culture overall, have approached the land. The approach has been to see it as a signifier. It has been that more male approach, which can sacrifice it in order to signify power. So it is so rich, so endlessly rich, when you have the presence of food in these ways that you can get into it. And when we started talking about the squash, and giving birth in the squash, I started thinking about squash. It's one of the three sisters, but it's the sister that's off in the kitchen, and not. It's kind of I forget, was it Martha who stays in the kitchen and Mary who's listening to Jesus, and squash is kind of the Martha in the kitchen, and beans and corn, the other two sisters, are out in public. We have books about them. We talk about them as signifiers, but squash is actually the first cultivar. It was cultivated about 3,000 years ago in Eastern Kentucky. We have, there's an excavation in the Red River Gorge that's been going on that has come up with some really fascinating proof of our culinary archaeology and history. And squash was cultivated about 3,000 years ago, and beans come after that, and corn doesn't come along until almost 2,000 years later. But you would think that corn was the first food of the Americas. And I wondered, we talked about how squash was not just a food that you ate, but the squash was used as a vessel. That's what, you would take a gourd and you would dry it and you would store things in it. And I even thought about the drinking gourd, in the history of the South. This is a song that the slaves used to point you north. Follow the drinking gourd. That is the Big Dipper in the sky. I mean, it's a language that we have, and yet for whatever reason, until Crystal's book, I never thought of the squash in this really magical way, and it just, it became magic in that book.
So yeah, tell us about the squash, Crystal. I'm so obsessed.
Well, I wanted to say one more thing about the women in this book and food, that I think food becomes a teaching tool for these women too, that being in the kitchen and garnering wisdom from the previous generation and passing it on. We don't have extended families like that anymore, but this family in the Birds of Opulence is a large one with a great grandmother and a grandmother and a mother, and so the ways that things are passed on was important to be over food, and even a sense of I talk a lot about the kitchen dance, and in my essays I talk about the kitchen ghost, but in my fiction, I talk a lot about the kitchen dance and the rhythm to that. That's almost like dancing when you have, there's that saying about too many cooks in the kitchen, but I think this family and many families have a wonderful way of everyone sort of taking their place in the kitchen and moving around, even in very, very, I'm thinking about my grandmother's kitchen, so small, tiny, tiny kitchen. Wow. But if you were in it, you knew your place. and you had this sort of dance that you did to get the meal prepared that everyone partakes in. And sometimes it was very loud, and sometimes it was very meditative when there was no need for people to talk because we had work to do and things had to be passed on. And then back to the squash. This also, so many of my ideas with writing come from my imagination from childhood. So, of course, there's a layer of some of those things that Ronnie talked about. But much of my sort of love for the tangible, for what I could touch and smell with squash, I was fascinated by squash as a child. I got in trouble for picking the squash and carrying it around because it looked like a baby to me. And even as an adult, there's something very, I don't know, what's the opposite of the word phallic? There's something very feminine.
Ironic.
Yeah, something very feminine about the shape of the squash to me. And so I wanted to use it, and then I thought about all parts of the squash. So I have the leaves, and I think of it as being very giving because, and it's beautiful. Squash plant's beautiful. You've got the blossoms, you've got all the this sort of maturation of it from seed to harvest, and it's beautiful all the way through. And so it's sort of a haunting vegetable, I think, that stays with these characters. I mean, because Yolanda was born there, but I think it's sort of a haunting vegetable anyway. If you look at it again from seed to harvest and even post-harvest, it sort of, to me, stands out and does some things that other plants don't. And I don't know, those are some of the reasons why I use it. I became sort of obsessed with it in this book. Like had to take a lot of the squash stuff out because I became so obsessed with it.
What about the color?
Someone said something wonderful. Squash leaves shelter the seedling beans in the Three Sisters.
Yeah.
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 What about the color? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, thinking of the leaves, and yeah, I love that idea too.
Yeah, and actually that role is almost as a mother protector. You know, those things, the bean puts nitrogen in, and the corn provides the stalk for the beans to go up, but the squash stays on the ground like a not actually a mulch, but it keeps the water in the ground in place, you know, and keeps everything moist. And that's a mother role. Beautiful.
And I was going to ask if the color of the squash, if that was something that you thought of, or if that was significant, or if that was something that you were thinking about.
Perhaps. I mean, that is something that sort of floats around Yolanda as a, you know, when she's born, her brother says she looks like an egg yolk, like he could pluck her. So there's yellow there, and then there's some other mention in the book about her skin color. So I don't think I consciously thought about the color, or maybe I did, because I know at one time I was thinking about, I was sort of in love with all of the, you know, I would also carry pumpkins around, and so I think many of these were in the same family. Cushaws too, or sort of things. I mean, I didn't play with the green beans or the potatoes, but pumpkins, cushaws, and squash, I remember getting in trouble for picking them and wanting to play with them.
You know, when you said that, I realized that I love in the fall going to the farm market or the grocery and picking out a big winter type squash, whatever it is, and I do cradle it also, I've never thought about that, but it is an instinctive thing to cradle that to your body. Just from an Appalachian standpoint, I should mention the cushaw is very much revered and loved in the mountains as a winter squash, and it actually is a Central American cultivar that has come up the trade route and into the Mississippi Valley, or the Mississippian, not the Mississippi Valley, but the Mississippian region from there. As far as we know, which is maybe not the full story, but as far as we know, the Cherokee actually cultivated the candy roaster squash, which is a squash that is much beloved, particularly on this side of the Blue Ridge, on the south side of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It shows up more frequently than the cushaw, which shows up more on the other side. So we actually have, the squash is actually a very early signifier of an Appalachian cultivar and foodway.
That's fascinating. Thank you. Another question that I had, we've talked a lot about the squash, and I've read that passage with the birth in the squash patch at least 100 times. I think it's so good and rich and packed full of things, and I kept thinking about, I don't know, I have a hard time articulating the specific spots where this happens, but I get this overarching sense that there's a really inextricable tie between women's bodies, food, land, fertility, and shame in this book. And it seems just to be like a really strong thread in that book. And I wondered if you could speak to that for just a few minutes.
I don't know if I can speak to that or not. My inclination is to say yes. I think definitely they're all there. I think you use the word shame. I would use judgment is there. I think that so many women from girlhood through every decade of a woman's life has something that people sort of focus on to shame. If you're a child in that first decade, it's like, are you growing up too fast? Are you a fast tail girl? Are you on your way to, are you being pious enough? And so I tried to address most of those in some way in this book, and some of them are particular to this particular family. I think the younger generation of women are sort of shamed in the kitchen too, at times by Minnie Mae, when that, as if, even though they've been doing it a long time, they don't know what they're doing. Don't put too much salt in that. Like, that's not how we fry egg, or whatever. And then of course, Minnie Mae as an elder, she's done some bad things, but I think that, and she wants to have a particular standing in the community, but they see part of her source of shame as her daughter, because her daughter had a child out of wedlock. She also, when she's there on the home place and she looks toward the hills, she is thinking of the things that perhaps are her own secrets that she hasn't told her daughter, that are the reasons for some of her behavior, because she had been sexually molested, when she was a child. So there's all of these various threads that, again, sort of loop back to the land in some ways. When Mona is sort of shamed at church because no one knows who her father is. It's not necessarily a food moment, but it's a nature moment because everyone notices what's going on in the sky at that moment. If there's a bird is chirping somewhere on that street, warbling when that happens.
Well, and that leads me to the next question, which I hope is a little more specific. I know that last one was kind of vague and all over the place. I'm really curious to hear about the book's connections to Africa in terms of place and rootedness. And I just kept thinking about Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon when I was reading, and flights back to Africa, and the scene with Mama Minnie in the field, when the narrator says old time people from across the waters were gathered around her and she's standing there in that soil. And then I was thinking about the title of the book explicitly, references birds and the possibility for flight. And you just mentioned another instance. And I just wondered how those connections were at work. If you were thinking about those connections, if you were like, no, actually, that's not what I was thinking.
No, I was thinking about those connections, and they come through. That was another thing in my family. Anything outside the United States, all the way to Africa, was across the water. Whatever it was, even if it was somewhere in Europe or wherever, it was across the water, but Africa was definitely across the water. So that was there, and it's there intentional, and it's supposed to, there's a whole layer of ancestral memory that's involved in this book. And even the cover, which I don't think I even have it here, but thank you. The cover. So the cover, that's a Sankofa bird. And the Sankofa bird is an Adinkra symbol of Africa. And so with every Adinkra symbol, there is a saying. So that one is, the short version is go back and fetch it. And the longer version says something like, you have to know where you come from in order to know where you're going. And so I think all of that appears thematically in the book, in the origin story of opulence, the things that are in the museum, the dry rotted dress, and there's a satchel with a heart on it. So the heart that's on the satchel is also an Adinkra symbol that is also a Sankofa symbol. I'm doing this, but there's a heart. If you've ever seen the Adinkra symbol, you can Google it. Google Sankofa. So you have both the bird that's looking back on the past while it's moving toward the future with an egg or a seed in its beak, is symbolic of Sankofa. But there's also, and its sort of sister symbol is a heart that is shaped with sort of curly cues at the top of the heart, and then it has little feet at the bottom. And it's a symbol, I know an African graveyard that they discovered in New York had the heart version of the Sankofa symbol on it. So there's lots and lots of layers with the birds and with Africa. And I'm sort of always writing or always thinking about writing. I think that's why sometimes I don't speak very well, because I carry these characters around all the time, and I'm sort of always writing and placing them somewhere. So there's both a prequel and a sequel to the Birds of Opulence that's in my computer in some bits, but mostly I have the prequel written, and in the prequel it's the founder of Opulence, that Black Hamlet, and he is a freed slave that comes in and buys this plot of land and deems this this place opulence, and he also has a strong connection to his African roots. And so one of the things that I was trying to do is to absolutely think about contemporary, like it starts in the 60s and comes up through the 90s, I believe, was to think about sort of a contemporary Appalachian Black family, where the notions of Africa would come into their home and into their daily lives. And one of that, of course, is calling upon the ancestors. In the end, spoiler alert, when Joe pours libations and calls the names of those women, that's also part of an African ritual. So there are many, many ways in the book, some sort of there overtly that you can see in some of them. You would just probably have to know that they were there.
So a few follow-up questions. The ritual that you're referencing at the end when he pours the libation, does it have a name?
I think no. It's just it depends on, I guess it's part of a variety of rituals. Usually, if someone dies, you can pay homage to them. If you're about to have an event, you would pour libations and ask the ancestors, is it okay if we go ahead and have this event? And by pouring the libations, you're asking the ancestors to sort of open the way for this event to occur.
And then follow-up question on the bird and the symbols. Could you spell those words for folks who want to look them up and may have trouble Googling if we're not sure how to spell?
So it's Sankofa, Sankofa.
Okay.
I have to write it down to myself. And Adinkra is Adinkra.
Okay. Thank you. Ronnie, did you want to follow up on?
I was curious, Crystal, if you have ever heard the phrase "throw down your heart." Is that it came from Bela Fleck, the banjo player, spent several months in Africa researching the African roots of the banjo and playing with musicians there. And that was the title of the documentary, the album and the documentary that he ended up doing. And when I first heard it, I thought, oh, throw down your heart. It's like my heart is in this place. It was this, I don't know, very sentimental kind of sweet thing. But what it turned out was that was something, according to Bela and the people he talked with, that was something that slaves said in grief, in people who were being enslaved in Africa as they were being loaded onto the ships, etc., was throw down your heart, leave your heart in the homeland, because where you're going, it is of no use to you.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know, I'm sure that's specific in a way that I'm not making it specific. I'm saying in Africa, I'm sure that is probably comes from a specific culture. But it was just, and when you were talking about the Sankofa heart, I've actually seen that image, although I don't know that I knew what it was. And I was wondering if it was, if that is going back to get your heart.
Oh, perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps, maybe. Yeah, because there are almost all the Adinkra symbols have two symbols. There's one that's more, there's lots of them, and that's just the one that I sort of focus on. And this is I don't know if you all can see that, but this is a sculpture that Shauna Morgan, who's married to Frank Walker, brought to me from Ghana. And so it's a carved Sankofa bird that I keep on my writing desk or on the shelf behind me all the time. Because I think I work a lot with ancestors. One of the projects that I'm working on now is sort of an expansion of the praise song for the kitchen ghost idea. And so I think that's also going back and fetching it, sort of the ways in which the ancestors affect us now, both character-wise and in real life. You know, one of the things I'm getting at in the Birds of Opulence is what's in the blood that we carry forward to the next generation. You know, mental illness or certain personalities, and then what's not. What can you change in the next generation? You know, what can you stop, like beating your children or, you know, or whatever. So it's like where are their choices about what the next generation will become or who they'll become, and what is sort of genetically out of our hands.
You know, there's so much of the DNA strand. They have isolated specific genes that affect certain things. So much of it is not understood. Like, what is this about? What does this have to do with? Which fascinates me. I wish I were a novelist. I think I have a novelist brain in a nonfiction writer's body. But this idea that we may not just carry physical characteristics, but we may actually literally be carrying story. That there are things, I mean, I think everybody has that experience. Well, I think many people have that experience of discovering that some ancestor that you had no particular connection to, that you share some sort of distinct characteristic, or something in your life has happened that mirrors that. You know, when we dig into our history, we start to find things like that. And I guess because everything to me comes down to story eventually. And so I believe that we carry story, that the story of someone's life is in me. In some sort of almost, I want to say literal way. Obviously, that's the wrong word, but in an organic way, in a way that is not just about hearing a story and adopting it, but actually having it in my bones, in my blood, and in my bones.
Well, this is a wonderful conversation. I'm so grateful, and I am seeing that we are nearing the end of our time. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I have not been monitoring the chat. I apologize. I was too wrapped up in the conversation and taking notes, but we'd love to open it up if there are questions or observations from folks in the audience. We've got a few minutes to discuss those things.
And Erica, this is Meredith. I'll just pop in to say that for some reason, I do not have access to the chat. I cannot see the chat, so I cannot do what I said I would do for you. So I'll ask you to either take a look at the chat, or you can invite folks to unmute themselves and just speak up.
All right. Well, I see some things in the chat. While I am looking in the chat, if anybody wants to unmute and just ask your question, you are welcome to do that.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, this is Betty Belanis. I asked a question in the chat about whether foraging and using wild foods are part of both of your work and observations, and how that is part of the regional identity through foods and medicine too from the forest.
Well, I guess I'm in the process of writing about some of those things. You know, that's one of my early memories. I have a journal, or I had a journal that my grandmother kept for years. I'm looking over here because I think it's in this closet that's in this corner, but it was a journal that I kept. So my grandmother would take me wild greens picking, and she would point out particular things, and I would try to draw them and put a line out to the side and label them in my journal as we were walking. But I think I'm probably too cityfied now. I would love to sort of relearn some of those things, but I don't remember them. I'm fascinated when I see other people doing whatever they do, making teas, or when I've been at Hyman before, there's someone who comes that has herbal medicines, and I'm really interested in that sort of thing, and fiddleheads and whatever else is out there. I often look at what do they call it, poke, as it grows up, or actually grows up around my house, and I keep thinking I'm going to make a poke, a mess of greens and use some poke in it, but I haven't yet. I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. It's a memory. I know my grandmother did it. I watched her do it, but I haven't done it yet.
So, my great-grandmother, my mother's maternal grandmother, was called a yarb woman, which is a term for an herb woman, because she knew, she was a gatherer, and she was also able to cure, to make medicinal tinctures, and to know what things you could gather from the woods that could cure things for you. And she took my mother as a child into the fields and the woods, and my mother grieved, truly grieved that she didn't pay enough attention. When you're talking about your notebook, I'm just like, oh, that's so exciting, so that was somewhat lost. But I do remember my mother, I've written about this, my mother telling a story about being in, my family left Eastern Kentucky twice. The first time during the Second World War, when my sister was little, they lived in Detroit. And then when I was little, we moved to Louisville. So both times so my father could work. And my father's favorite book was The Doll Maker. And my father grieved in Detroit in the way that Gertie does. He wanted to be back home. And my mother and her cousin discovered, Detroit has those big boulevards that have islands in the middle of them. And they discovered dandelions one spring, early, growing in the island. So they went out into the middle of the road and picked the dandelions, and she cooked the dandelions for my father, and it eased his homesickness. So I've always thought of that as being the connection. When I lived in Louisville, I had a poke patch that an older father of one of my friends knew where the poke grew in Cherokee Park in Louisville. And he took me to my poke patch, And then Sarah Fritchner, who was just here, I wish she was here right now. She just left a couple of hours ago. Sarah Fritchner, who was the food writer at the Courier Journal, he took her and showed her patch, which was a different patch. So we would not be messing in each other's greens. And so I cooked poke and would make it in the spring. And then I had a neighbor who was a botany professor, and his yard was like a Monet painting. You know, I could look out and it was like one of those gardens, and it was just beautiful. But in it, he had a patch of poke for me that he let be there. And he died while we lived there, and he knew that he was going to be passing away, and he was bequeathing his garden to the woman up the street who was a gardener. He took her around and talked to her about what was growing, etc. And she told me, he said, now that's pokeweed, but don't pull it up. That's Ronnie's. And she gets to cook from it. And poke is so powerful to me because it is a blood tonic. It is a thing that you eat in the spring that will do a little cleansing for you, but it will enrich your blood. It's rich in iron and the things that over the winter you have been lacking because of your lack of greens. And so I think of it as being powerful for the symbolic sense of this is my blood. This is the blood of my ancestors. This is the blood of my family, and this is what this green represents.
And it seems that's true for a lot of forageables. I mean, you know, people talk about ramps being a spring tonic, and then I may be misremembering, but isn't there a scene in The Dollmaker where Gertie and the children go through this affluent neighborhood and then end up in an area that is like an empty parking lot, but they find dandelion greens? Doesn't Gertie gather them and cook them?
Gosh, I don't know.
I'm confusing books, but I have this, that happened somewhere. So we only have a few minutes left, but I did want to ask or read a question from the chat. So Foodways writer and scholar Lucy Long is in the audience and has asked some great questions. And Lucy, I see them. And the most recent one that she asked was, what do you make of the recent attention to African elements in Appalachian culinary history? I'm thinking of restaurants like Benet in Asheville. And there's Lucy. So you could have asked your question yourself. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, Erica,
you're on mute.
I think we should have Lucy Long come be on one of these panels soon.
Now, it has been so much fun to listen to this, and then to get the perspectives. Erica is a wonderful, wonderful scholar, and is just, and then Ronnie is this wonderful food writer and cookbook writer, and then Crystal's stuff is just, your fiction stuff brings it all together and brings us all in. So, but I was wondering, and I don't think I spelled the name of the restaurant properly. Benet. No, but there's a new attention to the diversity that has historically been in Appalachia, Latino, Latinx, as well as African, and so I was just wondering, if you think that is changing the perception of Appalachia. It's definitely changing it for outsiders. Do you think it's changing it for insiders? Also, and making us more aware of our own diversity.
This is such an interesting. I'm going to jump in here for a second, and I shouldn't. I should let Crystal speak, and I will in just a second. But I actually, over this weekend, the last weekend, worked on 2 projects that had elements of this. First of all, I think this is one of the most. This is the most exciting thing about Appalachian Foodways to me right now is opening up this conversation, particularly the conversation about the African American presence in Appalachia, which has just been ignored. and either consciously hidden or unconsciously hidden. And when I'm saying unconsciously, I was just reading, you know, a lot of us read a book for a university publication, and I was just reading a book by an older gentleman who grew up in Appalachia, who is still making some of the same claims in the book, that, you know, we didn't really have any African American people. And then in just a few seconds, he talks about two Black communities that sandwiched his white community that had approximately 100 residents in them. And I'm like, what do you mean we didn't have this? You know, there's just, when you ask the question about, I think it's easier for people not from the region to accept and understand, because they're not coming into it with this mythology that we have all been given. There's also the mythology that, well, there may be a few other stray people in here, but we're all basically Scots-Irish. And when I started doing my own family, looking at my genealogy, we go back 4 to 6 generations in Appalachia, and I haven't come up with anybody from Northern Ireland yet. So I know that's just one person, but you know, we're about as Appalachian as it gets. So I would like to turn this over now to Crystal Wilkinson, who is going to do one hell of a job kicking down that door.
Well, I'm actually working on a book about the subject right now that I can't talk too much about yet, but hopefully I will be in the future. And I think other people, I saw your comment about this restaurant in Asheville, which I would love to go to. But I think for the longest time, we've been saying, we're here. Here we are. We've always been here. You know, my family has lived in the hills for over 150 years. You know, here we are in 2021, still trying to make our presence known. And like Ronnie said, there's always somebody said, well, yeah, I remember those people that lived up this holler one time. And they may have lived there their whole lives. But, you know, when Frank invented the word Appalachia and talked about making the invisible visible, I think that's still an ongoing issue. I love to hear younger Black people talk about this. And I was on a panel with a younger person who said that we need to stop saying that we're invisible, because we see each other. It's just a matter of, and it's trying to make mainstream, whether it's mainstream white folks in the region or people outside the region, see us, but we do see each other. And regarding foodways, I've been talking to some wonderful people like Cynthia Greenlee, who's doing work and working on books about Black people in Appalachia. She's working on a Black foods in Appalachia essay. I've been trying to write some essays and get my own family's sort of foodways story out into the world, and hope that I'm able to do that in the next few, whatever, however long it takes. And Ronnie knows about this project.
I love this project. I'm so excited about it. And Cynthia's work, we've talked, she and I are in communication about that essay. Ashley Shanti, who was the originating chef at Bene, she's no longer there. And she has been in touch with me that she is looking into this. One of the things that is really important, now we have dogs in Appalachia wanting to be seen and visible. One of the things that is really important to me is that in Southern foodways, Tony Tipton Martin was particularly essential in showing us the diversity of African American experience. And she the Jemima Code is basically this brilliantly annotated bibliography of every book that she could lay her hands on that was written by an African American about food and food waste. And the first cookbook published is by a woman named Melinda Russell. It is the first cookbook published by an African American, and I knew about it for several years, and everybody, you know, we would talk about it. And she came from Tennessee. She left during the Civil War. She was forced from her home. She went to Michigan. Women in Michigan helped her publish this book. And in the foreword of the book, she makes it clear that she's writing the book to raise the money to return to her home place in the South. And at some point that resonated for me. I went, wait a minute. In the Civil War, you've made it to Ann Arbor, Michigan area. Why are you returning to your home place? She must be Appalachian. because as my husband said, my amiable ex back in the day, he said, you know, every person I've met who's not from Kentucky married somebody who was, and you had to come back, you know? So I looked her up, and I looked up her history, and she was born in Greenville, Tennessee, in East Tennessee, right over the mountain. She had a boarding house and a bakery in the Chucky Mountain area. And she says in her book, it's so fascinating to me. She says in her book that she learned her cooking from a woman who was trained in the Mary Randolph's cookbook, although she doesn't give Mary Randolph's name, which I think is great, you know, because none of the white people like Mary Randolph ever identified the Black people whose food they were using, you know, and making money off of. But anyway, that she cooked in these homes, and we know that she went to Abington and Lynchburg and into Kentucky. And there has been a second assumption in the world of food waste, that because her cookbook has certain high table, you know, wealthier recipes in it, that she must have gone all the way into that part of Virginia. Someone once said to me, an older gentleman said to me once, I hear you are one of the Lundys of Virginia. And I said, oh no, we're not from that Virginia. He said, where are you from? And I said, Rose Hill. And he said, oh my, no.
And I hate to interject here. This is so rich. I just don't know if we will get in trouble if we go over. I don't know if Microsoft Teams has licenses for different things. Like I know with Zoom you have to, you know, let
me just say, Erica and Crystal, I was going to invite you all to come sit on my porch and continue this conversation as soon as we can. And Lucy Long, please, you come too.
Love it. I'm ready.
Yes. So thank you to everyone for coming today. It was a wonderful, rich discussion. Hey, Sandy, it's good to see you. And yeah, I'm happy to hang around and chat. I thought we should probably officially end just so we wouldn't mess up any conference planning in any way, but I'd love to hang around and talk.
Yeah. Meredith, can we do that?
Well, I don't know. I know it's being recorded, and I didn't set that up.
Well, actually, now that I asked that, I have to go get the famous Chevy Astro van out of Hawk before 1 o'clock. So I probably.
Roni, what were you doing?
No, it's at the. I took it in. This is my financial story of my life. I took it in because it was way overdue for some brakes, and they found something in the steering and yada, yada. And the end of the story is that when I get my stimulus check, I get $86 and the Astro gets the rest. So, so I have to go get the Astro. Love you all. This was beautiful. Let's do this again.
Thank you so much.
Love you too. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.